When one of Toho's films fell through, leaving the popular New Year's slot suddenly open, Toho Studios and director Ishiro Honda knew exactly who could fill it: the King of the Monsters, and a monster who would become Godzilla's greatest foe in the Godzilla franchise, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, June.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham. I'm here with my co-host Chris. How's it going today?
Going really well, sir. Really well.
Awesome. All right. Always glad to hear it. But today we are talking about Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. This film is a 1964 Japanese kaiju film directed once again by Ishiro Honda. Once again, special effects by Eiji Tsuburaya, produced and distributed by Toho. It is the fifth film in the Godzilla franchise, and it was the second Godzilla film produced in the year 1964 after Mothra vs. Godzilla. And the film stars Yosuke Natsuki, Hiroshi Kozumi, Akiko Wakabayashi, with Hiro Nakajima as Godzilla, Masanori Shinohara as Rodan, and Shoichi Hirose as King Ghidorah. And I apologize to any Godzilla fan who can pronounce those better than I can if I pronounce them wrong. Because some tongue twisters.
Yeah, it's Japanese names by way of American people who don't speak Japanese, so we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, I'm kind of pronouncing as I go. Maybe I should start practicing before we record.
Yeah. Get out the Google app to help us pronounce them better.
Yeah, something. But I'll go ahead and get right into the trailer for this one, and then we'll do the plot synopsis, and then I'll come back and give you a little info and some numbers on it, and we'll get right into it.
Sounds good.
東宝が生んだ大怪獣スターゴジラ、ラドン、モスラ、彼らに挑戦するキングギドラとは何か。
王女です。何？
敏腕刑事が探す謎の王女とは誰か。
空中爆破した飛行機に乗ってたものがだな。たった一人だけどうやって助かったかだ。
その通り。いいか。預言者は必ず盛り場に現れる。
さあ、王女、電話はどうしました？
幸せよ、なぜ悩む。
間に合ったぞ。
先生、王女の殺し屋です。
この人は異常ではないよ。
あなた方はまだわからないのですか？
問題は日本一国の問題ではございません。モスラは一度ゴジラと戦って勝っております。誰がゴジラとラドンを説得するんです？
モスラを呼びます。モスラに話してもらいます。
豪華キャストで織りなす凄絶なドラマ。三大怪獣勝つかキングギドラ勝つか。映画史上空前のスケールと迫力で描く三大怪獣地球最大の決戦にご期待ください。
Reporter Naoko Shindo attends a communications session with the UFO Society for her television program. However, it is deemed a failure due to Naoko's skepticism. A meteor shower soon descends on Japan, with the largest meteor crashing on Mount Kirodake. Naoko's brother, Detective Shindo, is assigned to guard Princess Salno of Selgina from a political assassination during an unannounced visit to Japan. En route to Japan, an alien entity leads Salno to jump from her plane before it explodes. Professor Miura leads a research team to Mount Kirodake to investigate the large meteor, where they discover it randomly emits magnetic waves. Naoko is sent to investigate a prophetess claiming to be from Venus, who predicts that the pterodon Rodan will emerge from Mount Aso. The prophetess catches the attention of both Shindo and Salno's uncle, both of whom recognize her as the supposed dead Salno. Responsible for the assassination plot, Salno's uncle sends the assassin Malamus to kill her. After participating in a TV program, the Shobijin, Mothra's fairy twins, prepare to depart for her home, but are warned by the prophetess to not sail. Naoko takes the prophetess to a hotel to interview her, and discovers that the Shobijin have been following them, heeding the prophetess, warning before the prehistoric sea monster Godzilla sunk their ship. After confirming that the prophetess is Salno, Shindo finds her at the hotel and saves her from the Malamus. They evacuate after Godzilla and Rodan converge on the city and battle throughout the countryside. After Dr. Tsukamoto, a psychiatrist, concludes that the prophetess is human, she predicts the arrival of the alien dragon King Ghidorah, a monster that destroyed her home on Venus. Miura and his team witness the meteor explode, unleashing the golden three-headed space dragon Ghidorah, who proceeds to attack Matsumoto. The authorities plead with the Shobijin to summon the larva monster Mothra for help, but they warn that Mothra alone could not defeat Ghidorah, and their only hope would be for Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra to join forces. Under hypnosis, the prophetess reveals that some Venetians escaped to Earth for Ghidorah and assimilated with humans, resulting in them losing their abilities with the exception of predictions. After Malamus overhears Tsukamoto recommending shock therapy next, he increases the voltage to a fatal degree, but fails after the power lines are destroyed by Godzilla. After thwarting Malamus and his crew, Shindo evacuates to the mountains with the prophetess, Tsukamoto, Naoki, Murray, and the Shobijin. Mothra attempts to convince Godzilla and Rodan to set aside their differences to save the planet, but both refuse due to years of harassment from humans. After seeing Mothra attempt to battle Ghidorah on her own, Godzilla and Rodan rush to her aid. The prophetess wanders off and regains her memories after Malamus nearly kills her. Shindo protects her in time and Malamus falls to his death. The monsters overwhelm Ghidorah and force it to flee into outer space. Prior to departing for home, Princess Salno reveals to Shindo that she has no memory as the prophetess, but remembers the three events when Shindo saved her, and thanks him and Naoko for their help. Godzilla and Rodan watch as Mothra journeys back home with the Shobijin, who bid farewell to all. Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster was theatrically released in Japan on December 20th, 1964, followed by a theatrical release in the United States on September 29th, 1965, by Continental Distributing, as Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster instead of Ghidorah. It earned 375 million yen, or just over $1 million, at the Japanese box office, and 1.3 million at the American box office, once again, not adjusted for inflation. The film received generally positive reviews, and early contemporary American critics gave it an average rating of about 5 to 6 out of 10, which back then, critics looked at films back then way different than I think we do now.
Yeah, and I mean, make no mistake, certainly in the 60s, these films coming from Japan, they were often kind of inherently perceived as B movies. They were popular in drive-in theaters as sort of the second film behind another sort of A movie. So there was sort of in the same way that like every time a slasher movie comes out, it's almost inherent that critics just kind of write it off as kind of sleazy, cheap, schlocky entertainment. These movies sometimes kind of got pigeonholed in the same way, like, oh, it's just a big goofy monster movie. I don't think there were a lot of people pushing for like a serious critical appraisal of any of these movies because they were just perceived as goofy. So it's hard to put stock into the critics of the day sort of writing these movies off.
Yeah, I mean, and because this has nothing to do with Godzilla, but just like the NPAA, you know, when it comes to horror movies, they allow way more today than they did in the 70s, 80s, 90s. It's just everything has evolved to today's standards. So looking at these films from when they came out to people looking at them now is completely 100% different.
Exactly. And, you know, people bring this up before, but it's like, hey, you know, off the top of your head, find any average Joe and ask them to name the top 20 movies of 1964, what the 20 best movies of 1964 were. And I bet a lot of people probably can't name a lot. But, you know, Mothra vs. Godzilla and Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster are both from 1964, and I would say that they carry a bigger following and bigger awareness than many movies that came out in 1964. So, you know, the critical appraisal of the time hardly matters when measured against the lasting legacy of the movies.
Yeah, and those are probably the only two movies from 1964 that I could give you. And
yeah,
unless you gave me like 10 minutes to look some movies up and be like, hey, I know that one. I know that one.
Yeah. As the further each additional decade you go back, the fewer movies I know from the decade. So once you start getting back to 60s and 50s, it's almost exclusively Godzilla movies, especially the early 60s.
I'll go on to a couple numbers for you. And on Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 75% with an average rating of 5.8 out of 10, which I don't 100% understand how you have a 75% with an average rating of 5.8, but I don't know if you can explain that to me. Otherwise, I'll let that go.
So with Rotten Tomatoes, and again, I know they change things up every now and again. It feels like every time a new Disney movie's getting like crapped on, they like change the whole way they factor in ratings and reviews. So I don't know, but generally speaking, the way that you could see something as a 75% fresh with an average rating of 5.8 out of 10 is what you said, something like that.
Yeah.
So the way that happens is that if a review is considered a passing grade, whether it's a 3 out of 5 or a 6 out of 10, that is considered fresh. So that 75% rating is saying that 75% of the people rated the movie as good as opposed to bad. So 75% of the critics gave it a passing score or higher, gave it a passing score as opposed to a failing score. So you can get a 75% people giving it a passing score, but the average can be lower than 75% because that indicates that the people who didn't give it a passing score rated it very lowly, or the people who did give it a passing score sort of gave it like barely passing. So like a movie could, like in theory, a movie could be 100% on Rotten Tomatoes in that everyone says that it's good, but everyone could give that movie a 6 out of 10. And so then that movie's average rating would be a 6 out of 10, which isn't very good, but everybody could have agreed on that, given a movie a 6 out of 10, and then it's 100% on Rotten Tomatoes if everyone gave it a 6 out of 10. So it's kind of a weird way of factoring it in. People look at the percentages like, oh, this is its rating out of 100. It's like, no, it's like, that's how many good reviews out of 100, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I kind of was leaning in that direction to where it must have been, you know, the people who have rated that it was fresh, but then one guy gave it a 9, another guy gave it a 3, this guy gave it a 7, this guy gave it a 4.
Exactly. So the average rating is important to look at, because a movie where everyone says it's a 6 out of 10 versus a movie where most people say it's a 10 out of 10, but then some people say it's a 5 out of 10, it's like those are two very different sort of 90% or 100% that you could get, you know?
Yeah, so it all averages out in the end anyway. So that's okay. I'm glad I asked you that, because it's what you said, mostly what I was thinking, but I never like dug into it. So I'm glad we're on the same page there.
Yeah, and not to get us off track, but there was some wacky article from like last year or earlier this year or something where people thought that since it's called RottenTomatoes.com that the rotten was a good thing and the fresh tomato meant like you were throwing tomatoes like you were in the crowd. Like people didn't understand, like even with it being how it is, people still didn't grasp. They thought that like the rotten meant good because it's Rotten Tomatoes and like the tomato like I don't know, that like somehow the higher percentage was bad and the lower percentage was awful. Like the percentage represented how many people called it a rotten tomato. I don't know. I'm like, dude, remember, the biggest mantra ever is to remember that, think about how dumb the average person is, and then remember that half the population is dumber than that.
Well, I'm hoping I'm on the better side of that.
Yeah, we're on this podcast together. That means we're absolutely in the elite 2% of the population.
Absolutely. We're talking about Godzilla. We have to be somewhat smart.
As high tier as they come.
All right, so Godzilla is on screen in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster for 7 minutes and 55 seconds, or 9 minutes of the film. And his first appearance isn't until 39 minutes and 23 seconds, or 42% of the way into the movie. Which I can say in this film, that is something I am not a fan of. In some films, I like the slow burn at the beginning, and in this one, I'm just not a fan of a lot of the human characters in this, I should say.
Huh. That's interesting to hear. Watching the movie, it didn't actively feel like Godzilla was held back or kept away from. But again, when you start to have 4 monsters in the movie and you're juggling it a little bit, it's not all about when there is Godzilla or not Godzilla. So it with these sort of monster mash kind of movies, it becomes a little easier to forgive Godzilla's specific sort of lack of screen time or lack of presence. These human, this is actually one of the dynamics. I think the Mothra versus Godzilla, and then this one, I like this sort of this 3-tiered main character kind of trifecta dynamic that they have going on. And I mean, we'll get into more of that when we start to talk about characters and stuff. But I actually, the human side of this story, I actually did quite a bit.
See, I seen this at a very young age, and I would always fast forward to the fight scenes. So I guess I never really actually paid attention to the entire movie until I was maybe a late teenager.
Okay.
And I actually watched the entire thing. But before that, you had the VHSs where you could fast forward and see the movie and how far you're fast forwarding. So as soon as the fight started, that's where I would stop it at.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I did a lot of the same things. It was just all about the monster fights. You put on the movie and it's playing, and you're like playing with your toys, and then you pay attention when the monsters show up, kind of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like this movie. This film marks the debut of King Ghidorah, who's most Godzilla fans, he's one of their favorites. He's one of the most recurring antagonists in the Godzilla franchise. And then this film also marks the turning point for Godzilla's transformation from villain to hero for most or the rest of the Showa era.
Yeah, it begins a sort of, I hesitate to say things like character arc, but, you go from Godzilla absolutely being the bad guy in Mothra versus Godzilla to a film where it's sort of a classic vintage concept of there's a greater evil, and so Godzilla becomes the lesser of two evils, and the only thing that can stop Godzilla and Rodan from conducting their business is if they have a worse monster that they have to team up against with Mothra to fight. So it's classic storytelling tropes, but it does start to turn things around to get it to where now the audience is rooting for Godzilla and rooting actively for good monsters versus bad monsters, So it is a change of the dynamic for the series.
Yeah, and it's not a bad movie. I don't know. I can't really tell you what I don't like about it. But like I said, I like all the Godzilla movies, but I don't really know what bugs me about this film that I watched it twice over the week because the first time I caught myself watching it, not paying attention to it, and like kind of wandering off, sitting on my phone, or I'd get up and be like, "Oh, there's some dishes to do in the sink. Let me whip up the dishes real quick, or let me get something to eat." So I had to make myself sit down and re-watch it to figure out some of our questions for later, such as like my favorite character or my most memorable or favorite quote of the film. Like that. So I made myself sit down and pay attention, which through a lot of the Godzilla films is something I don't have to do. Usually from the jump, I'm locked in. So I'm not sure what it is about this film.
That's interesting. I really dig this one, and I found myself really kind of being on board with it when I watched it this time. And sometimes if you were to ask me beforehand, like how much you think you're going to enjoy this watch through, or how much would you ever name it as one of your favorites, but it's not on the level of Mothra versus Godzilla, but I did find myself really digging it a bit. Even if things didn't really jump out and stand out to me, there's just a lot that this is sort of quintessential kind of 60s Godzilla in the Godzilla teaming up with other monsters to fight a bad monster. Like this is sort of the trope maker for that kind of storyline, and I really like it.
Yeah, I mean, once the movie gets going, I'm into it. I don't know if it's like the princess as a side, like almost like a side story. I look at her as, and then you got the monsters fighting, you got the detective, you got the assassins. I mean, so there's a lot going on that can keep your interest in this film. I don't know if when I was younger I didn't like it, so I went into my first watch of it this week kind of predetermining what my decisions and outcome for the film already were going to be. So that's another reason I made myself sit down and watch it again and give it a rewatch. But I mean, there is a lot to like about this movie. I'm not knocking it at all. It's definitely not the worst in the franchise. So, I mean, I get a good kick out of it.
Yeah. One thing I'll go into some things that I love about it. I love Akira Ifukube's score, and one thing that is really cool in this one that they started to do is I like the way that they would intertwine and intermesh things that the humans were doing with things that the monsters were doing in a really interactive way, to where it wasn't just humans watching monsters fight and being vested in the outcome. Moments like when they got Princess Salno and they're doing the sort of electroshock therapy treatment on her, and the assassins sneak in and crank the voltage all the way up to where it'll kill her, and they're right about to flip the switch that would do so, and Rodan and Godzilla are fighting, and Rodan drops Godzilla on the power lines, and it cuts the power, and so it saves the princess's life. It's like, it's not the monsters and the humans interacting actively, but it's things that the monsters are doing causing a direct cause and effect to the human storylines. And it happens later when the rocks fall and crush the assassin. Things like that are really fun in this one to me. And you didn't see a ton of that. It was either, are the humans in the cities being destroyed by the monsters, or are the humans off to the side watching the monsters fighting or destroying? And they made efforts to sort of intertwine and intermesh that stuff in this movie, and that's one of my favorite things about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I mean, in little doses would continue throughout the franchise. It's good to see. I mean, they're clear, because Godzilla and Rodan and Ghidorah, they're clearly fighting in a close range to where our human characters are at. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to follow these characters throughout the movie. So it's nice to see that things that the monsters are doing are having an effect on the characters we're following. That it kind of keeps you entangled into the movie.
Yeah, and progressing from Mothra versus Godzilla, where you had some greedy businessmen as kind of human antagonists, they take the plot thread in this movie take that notion further, and they have, you have a primary character of Princess Sauna who's has assassins after her. So now you have someone, the Detective Shindo is protecting her. So you actively have this sort of action assassin plotline going on where you have a bad human character, a villain human character who's trying to kill another human character completely independent from all of this monster nonsense going on. So then it's like, okay, now we're rooting for our heroes to get away. There's a bad guy actually shooting at them directly. They're not worried about getting stomped on by monsters. There's a villain that we've got to make sure gets killed by the end of the movie. It kind of gives it a little bit more of a traditional movie dynamic of good guys, bad guys, getting away from the bad guys, surviving, fighting them. There's some shootouts and fist fights and things of that nature. And it kind of brings a little bit more of an active human element to the movie. And there are definitely some movies in the franchise where we'll talk about it, where it's like, okay, you don't want the humans to be the total focus of the movie and it feel like the monsters are barely showing up or barely out here. But you want to have a good dynamic where you're keeping things with the humans a little interesting beyond just observing and responding to the monsters. So I think this one strikes a really good balance in that regard.
Yeah, something I just thought about listening to you talk was it's probably just a coincidence, but our three main characters, they're going up against an assassin, kind of. They have the main assassin, and then you got Mothra, Rodan, and Ghidorah, Mothra, Rodan, and Godzilla, which are our main trio of monsters going up against an assassin and Ghidorah. So you got two different kind of assassin plot lines, because if Ghidorah gets past Godzilla, Mothra, and Rodan, who knows what he's going to do.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and yeah, I'd never thought about that sort of 3 and 3 against one villain sort of dynamic. And while we're on that, I like what Mothra and this movie had, in that you have a main character dynamic where you have kind of a detective, reporter, photographer, female, inquisitive sort of character. You have your sort of heroic lead. In this one, it's a detective. In the last one, it was a reporter. And then you have your kind of scientist who, it's odd that the scientists in Mothra vs. Godzilla and this film have similar names, are played by the same actor, Hiroshi Koizumi, but are not the same character. I think it's Professor Murata and Professor Mirai. So it's like they're essentially the same character, and you could have easily probably called them the same character, and it would have been like a good continuity thing, but they made a point that they're not the same professor, not the same guy, I guess. And but I just like that dynamic because it gives characters different perspectives. And Princess Sauno having her sort of I would say, compared to other movies in the franchise, the way they kind of do this Venus people, alien sort of inherited possession psychic thing. I like that kind of lo-fi way of bringing an alien plotline into a Godzilla movie. I prefer that to some of the other ways that we see aliens get brought into Godzilla movies down the road, but we'll talk to that when we get to it.
And I can't wait to get to it. On another side note, we're doing a lot of talking about characters, so I'll ask you if you can get right into who your favorite character was in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster.
Might be a little bit of a that's a tough one. It might be a little bit. The most interesting character that's unique for the movies would be Princess Sauno, because she's just bringing this weird sort of prophetess vibe to it, and the actress is very gorgeous, so that never hurts either. But I mean, the Detective Shindo being the sort of bodyguard, like those two have this great dynamic where it's like a bodyguard and a target of assassination. That like you don't get a human interaction like that very often in a Godzilla movie. So I just like that kind of two-handed. You've got someone being protected, and then a guy like he gets to be an action guy, kind of, he gets to fire his gun, he gets to try and to save her life and protect her from assassins, and that's kind of a bit more meat on the bones than a lot of these human protagonists get to do in Godzilla movies. So I just liked that about this movie. I liked those two characters.
Yeah, and that's you talked a little bit about mine. I went with, I believe his name was Detective Shindo. I put him as my favorite character for, like you said, he gets to be kind of like an action star. He's trying to save lives. He's doing a little bit of everything. He's in a couple movies. He's going to turn out to be Jason Bourne. He's saving lives, and he's just, to me, he was the most interesting character. I know this is probably blasphemy to Godzilla fans, but I didn't really like the princess. As you said, she was very pretty and she was attractive. But like when she spoke, granted this, I'm in the American dub, she was so plain and bland. In the Japanese, she sounded much better and more authentic. But I would have to, for my favorite character, I'd have to go with the detective.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. And I mean, there's interesting characters in it. Professor Mirai is a little bland, but the sister of the detective, Naoko, she's interesting in that she drives some aspects of the plot in terms of taking the princess away, and when they're trying to work with the fairies, the Shobijin, to coordinate this kind of monster alliance. She gets her own interesting moments. There's some really interesting and good female characters in this movie that drive things in some interesting ways. So this is a human cast that's kind of got, like, it's not a bad set of characters for a Godzilla movie as far as the human cast goes. I'm quite fond of it.
No, not at all. And going along with his sister, she also finds the Shobijin twins, or the Shobijin twins were following them, I guess you could say. But she has pretty much all the communication with them through the film. So I mean, each character has their own things to do in this film to keep the plot rolling. I will go ahead and tell you that my favorite score from this film was the main title. I know this film starts from here. Oh man, for the next multiple films, a lot of the scores and soundtracks are recycled through one another. So we might get a couple of the same favorite scores coming from me. But my favorite in this one was the main title.
Yeah, that's an excellent choice, and yes, with the way a lot of these films, if you don't know the names of specific tracks and you just say like, oh, the main theme, because you'll hear the main title music, and then later on in the film you'll hear the kind of main riffs and main motifs over and over again. So even if you're not specifying which specific track, you're almost always talking about the same kind of music. And the opening title sequence in this one thing I love about, separate from the music in this opening title sequence, is how it sort of shows these sort of bits and pieces of the monsters, almost like a little tease, a little taste of the kind of what's to come ahead. I really liked that about the opening sequence of this movie, to sort of give you a little appetizer of the monster action that's going to come later in the movie. But the specific track, I mean, the main theme is excellent, and the track that I picked out to pick a specific one was called "The Greatest Battle of All Time," which essentially is just the main theme, the da 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 da. That music's iconic to me, and I just love the idea of Akira Ifukube calling a track for a monster movie "The Greatest Battle of All Time." It's like that's the kind of name you want for a song in a monster movie, and the tune is just absolutely addictive to listen to. So So yeah, it's essentially that sort of main theme, main tune.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And another thing I agree with that you said was the clips of the main title sequences where they're showing like Ghidorah's, like, I don't know if it's his side or his chest, the gold scales, and that that is a great part of the film because unless you've seen the trailer or actually paid attention, as a kid, you don't know what that is. You're like, what? I know Godzilla and I know Rodan, but what is this monster? I don't know who's gold, who's. But as a growing Godzilla fan, you clearly see that, and you're like, something big's happening. The three-headed monster is coming in.
Yeah, and it's a fun tactic because there's the superficial debates and the non-superficial debates about it's always the screen time of the monsters. How much are they in? When do they appear? When do they not appear? How much of a balance do you strike? And a lot of the audience for these movies, can be young children. So I think it's a good move to kind of, without getting straight into monster action right off the bat, to still kind of allow, to sort of satiate that desire by the viewers to see a little, to get what they paid for a little bit coming up. Like give us a little bit of a tease, show us a little bit of something, give us some moments to kind of get our monster fix in right before we start to dive into the main plot. It's not really structured like a sort of flashback, but by having the opening title show off these kind of monster action, you kind of know where the film is heading, and it's going to kind of reach this great climax.
Yeah, and that's another thing that helps. I feel like when America got the rights to these films and brought them over to be released theatrically, I think that's another reason why they cut out so much, and so much is different, because I believe the Japanese runtime of this film is 94 minutes. And I'm not 100% sure, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe the American cut is like 85 minutes. So, I mean, if you take 9 minutes out of humans talking, or, whatever isn't the monsters fighting, it adds up. I mean, that's quite a bit of time. I mean, that's a tenth of the movie being cut out, and now you have more Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and it's a faster paced film for a kid. It seems like there's more time with the monsters. So, I mean, America knew what they were doing when they brought these films over and trimmed them down.
Yeah, absolutely. Every Godzilla fan comes down in a different spot on the issues, and my pendulum has swung all over. When you're a little kid, I'm not watching anything with subtitles. I don't care. Then you get older and you get that kind of purist streak where you're like, I don't ever want to watch anything dubbed. I want to watch it exactly as they originally made it. Then every change the Americans made just ruins the movie. But then, you sober up, you get a little older, and it's like, it is just inherently kind of nice to watch the movies in English. And most of the changes I don't hate. You're within, I'm pretty sure you're spot on the runtime of the Japanese and US cut. If you're off, it's within like a minute, which is inconsequential. It's about a 9-minute cut from the Japanese version to the American version. And a lot of like kind of odd, like they'll rearrange certain scenes. I don't know. I don't have a photographic memory of every single alteration that they make, but a lot of it is just sort of trimming out some human material, rearranging the sequence of some things to kind of clean up the timeline of the movie a little bit. But so inherently, it is kind of like a stronger, faster pace kind of cut of the movie. And as you said, you take 9 minutes out of a 90-minute movie, and that's 10% of the film, and that's significant. And I'm sure I've used this quote before, but there is a famous old editing quote that says, "If you shake a movie, 10 minutes will fall out." You can kind of, without cutting huge chunks or things of huge consequence, you can get a movie down by about 10 minutes, and you feel like you've really not lost anything while getting it 10 minutes shorter. And I think that's kind of, you'll see a lot of the, like it's no coincidence that there's a couple of these where I think the difference is somewhere in the sort of 5 to 10 minute range for some of the material they cut. And the only change, while we're on the American version, the one change that I'm not a huge fan of is, I think, I've not seen the American version in a number of years, but they change most of the music in the film. They keep the main theme, the sort of iconic one that everyone knows, but I think outside of that, they replace a lot of the music, and that's one that's hard to kind of sit by. And I think the dub's always referring to Mothra as a he in this movie, so that larva that survived is a he instead of a she. I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world, but little things like that. There's always the little things about the dubs in the American versions where it's like if there's a few things that kind of are almost deal breakers, but then there's a lot of things that they do well and do right. I'm all for tightening up the pace of the movie. I'm not really in favor of calling Mothra a he when she's a she, and I'm not a huge fan of replacing a lot of the music, but there are a lot of good things about trimming the movie up and speeding the pace up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it never hurts to have a higher percentage of monsters in your runtime, especially if you're showing these movies to kids.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You were talking about quotes, and that was a great quote you gave us. I had never heard that. If you shake a movie, that you can drop 10 minutes out.
Can I tell you the very specific Godzilla reason that I know that quote?
Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to go a little bit down a rabbit hole here. So the Godzilla 2000 DVD and Blu-ray, there's an audio commentary on it where the producers and editors of the American version of Godzilla 2000 talk about all the different sort of edits and trims and adjustments they made to the American version versus the Japanese version. And that US cut, coincidentally, is somewhere around 9 minutes shorter than the Japanese cut. And the producer of that recalled a quote. I think Don Siegel is the classic filmmaker, director, editor that he was quoting, Don Siegel. But the producer of the US version of Godzilla 2000 was quoting him, and he's like, you can shake a movie and 10 minutes will fall out. And I feel like we shook this movie and 9 minutes fell out and for the American version. Then I watched that movie with the DVD audio commentary when I was a kid, maybe about 10, 11, 12 years old. And that quote stuck with me for my entire life. And every time I watch a movie that I feel is a little bit too long, I'm always talking to my buddies. I'm like, like you can shake this movie and 10 minutes will fall out. Or if it's one of these 3-hour movies, I'm like, this is a 2.5-hour movie pretending to be a 3-hour movie. And my mind always goes back to that quote.
That's interesting. That is super interesting. Which, a fun fact, I have not seen the Japanese version of Godzilla 2000. I've listened to the soundtrack. I have the film, the Japanese version of it. I just never watched it. So once we get to that, that'll be my first viewing.
Maybe we'll do both versions, because I come down a lot of these Japanese American versions. I can kind of take either or. There's pros and cons to both, but with Godzilla 2000, I come down pretty hard in favor of the American version.
Yeah, that was the first Godzilla film I've seen in theaters. So
same. First Japanese one I saw in '98 in theaters, but as far as the first true Godzilla movie, for sure was Godzilla 2000.
Nope. I seen Godzilla 2000. That was my first Godzilla film ever in theaters, and
Nice.
what an experience it was. But
Nice.
I'll let us talk about our theater experiences for that on that episode.
100%.
But speaking of that quote, I'll give you my favorite quote from the film, which actually came from the Shobijin's translation from Mothra. And it was when Mothra was trying to convince Godzilla and Rodan to fight together. And it was, the Earth doesn't belong to humans alone. It's ours too, and we should defend it. And I just liked how Godzilla and Rodan were just being so hard-headed. They're like, we'd rather fight each other and instead of help the humans, because what have they done for us? You know, I think in the subtitles, it was Godzilla said, all they've done is bully us. Which, to me, you're 150, 160 feet tall. How are you getting bullied by a 6-foot person? I get you're getting missiles shot at you and stuff, but I liked that. It was almost like a comedic little scene. I liked that in this film.
Yeah, and you actually that was my pick as well for quote. You know, you always want to find something that kind of like gets at the heart of the movie, and that entire sequence where the fairies are doing the translation of the dialogue. I remember I was always so fascinated by that as a kid, because it's like, oh, it's like the monsters are talking to each other, and we get to hear what they say. And you know, growing up on the American version, there's the great line, you know, since we both decided on the same quote that we like, I'll throw a favorite joke line that I have from the American version, where the fairies, they say, "Oh, Godzilla, what terrible language," you know, like I just loved the idea when I was a kid, the idea of Godzilla, like he swears at the other monsters, it's just that, like, you're in like a totally imaginative B-movie realm there, where you have not only the monsters conversing with each other, but dropping expletives at each other. I've like, as a kid, I just loved that.
Yeah, you took that one right out of my mouth, because I was waiting for you to get done, and that's exactly where I was gonna go. Godzilla, what terrible language, and you took it right from me. That was perfect.
Yeah. The U.S. cuts, they have some zingers for sure. Then I love the bit where there's a scene where they get back into the car after they're escaping somewhere in the middle of the movie, and the princess is still kind of in Martian mode if it's the American version, or Venus mode in the Japanese version. And the detective Shindo, he's like so dismissive. He's like, well, she's still a Martian, you know, like we didn't cure her of her weird psychological thing she's got going on. Like, she doesn't remember that she's the princess still, like she's still in Martian mode, you know, like she's still a Martian. Like, that's like, I love stuff like that, you know. These movies are a lot of fun, and they don't make a lot of movies like this, you know.
Yeah, if you catch it in the in the American versions, they dump little subtle like quirks, like they try to throw a little joke in here and there, or make a line that'll give you a little chuckle. And it's hard when you're watching the Japanese version, because you're reading, you know, so it's hard to actually like laugh at what you're reading, almost, instead of in the American version, you hear those lines and it gives you a little chuckle or a little smirk, because you know that's exactly what that line was intended to do.
Yeah, I read something or heard something somewhere that the psychology behind reading words, sort of, that when you're watching a movie, that it kind of, that reading it, you pick up less on something that might be kind of funny or goofy or things like that, because you're kind of in a different mindset of like reading the words that are on the screen versus just kind of listening to something. So things don't catch you off guard in the same way. And it's when it's another language, you're not picking up on the inflection the right way, so you're not sure if like a line is being said sarcastically or not. And I think I remember when Robert Rodriguez was talking about his film El Mariachi, which is subtitled in America, and he talked about how he would go to like film festivals and stuff and show it, and that audiences were kind of caught off guard, because he says that people always seem to think that when they watch a movie with subtitles, that it automatically means they're watching something sort of like art house and serious, and that El Mariachi is like this goofy kind of fun action movie with a lot of comedy elements. He's like, people don't understand that the movie's like funnier than it actually is because they're watching it subtitled, and they think that like inherently makes it much more of a dramatic and artsy kind of movie. And I think sometimes when whether it's anime or Godzilla movies or anything, if you're watching the subbed versus dubbed with subtitles, it's a lot easier to kind of forget how off the wall and ridiculous some of the proceedings are being that you're actually seeing. You know, it's like when you watch the dub, it can kind of land a little bit more of kind of how much fun is being had with the concept.
Yeah, it's hard to laugh at a language that you don't understand. You know, you can't feel the sense of humor that they have, and it's hard to read it and pay attention to them at the same time to see if they're giving you a smirk or a smile, or they have a serious death look on their face that, oh, you know, you're in trouble right now, like I'm dead serious. But the American version, you know, the dubs aren't too bad. They could have used some different voices for them, or, you know, some people that put a little more into it. But for the 1960s, you know, we're bringing a Japanese film over here and we're dubbing over it. You know, they're fun. You know, it's something you can't complain about. You just have fun and watch it.
Yeah, exactly. They've got a vintage quality to them, and you know, hindsight's 2020. You know, you could say like, oh, we could go back and redub all of the movies, and it could be, you know, totally much more accurate to the dialogue and yada 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 yada. But it's like, yeah, they're representations just as much as the movies themselves are representations of the times they were made. Their English dubs and English versions are time capsules in their own way as well. So it's like, you know, you gotta kind of take them as they are, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And getting a little back on topic, I know me and you both like to ramble, so that's fine. But our favorite quote leads into what was my favorite scene of the film, which is like the grand finale fight. You know, everybody's pulling punches, we're throwing rocks, we're shooting out our gravity beams, our atomic ray, you know, we're giving it all. We're dropping rocks, I believe, what is it, this one that Rodan lifts Godzilla up and throws him in the Ghidorah?
Yes, and my personal favorite combo move is Larva Mothra getting on Rodan's back and firing the silk webbing at Gadora from Rodan's back.
That one gives me a little chuckle every time, because I still can't believe that the little webbing, that it defeated Godzilla in Mothra vs. Godzilla, and now it's wrapping up King Ghidorah. That's got to be some serious webbing.
Yeah, and I just love any of the sort of. It's always fun because in life you don't really see, you know, you're not going to see like a bird and a snake or something like that kind of like team up to take on a larger predator. Like, it's something that's like so not really natural. It's just like seeing two dinosaurs team up in a Jurassic Park movie. It's so kind of out there that it's just really fun and entertaining to see in a movie. So to see like Rodan put Mothra on his back, or to see Godzilla sort of dragging Mothra as she holds on to his tail, like moments like that, the sort of like team up stuff between the monsters when it's done well, like it just like, it's hard to watch that stuff and not just like smile and have a really good time with it. You know, it's like we're in a total different realm of movie at this point. You know, this isn't a sci-fi, this is a sci-fantasy, you know, and you just along for the ride.
Yeah, after King Kong vs. Godzilla, I feel like they knew what they had, and so they knew they had entertainment value, so that's the direction they went with a lot of the rest of these movies.
Yeah, definitely. When I was looking up and looking into stuff and saw how one of the things that Ishiro Honda said about Mothra was that they wanted to make something that a monster movie that wasn't dark and serious, but was sort of bright and pretty, and almost something that could have been like a Disney animated movie, but live action. And you see that different mentality. You know, every decade of cinema and every decade of a franchise sort of has its tone. And when you look at the Godzilla movies of the 50s, and also, you know, Rodan was out in 56, and I think Varan the Unbelievable was out in the 50s as well. When you look at the tone of those 50s, there's that sort of more dour and sort of allegory, and it's a dark sort of cautionary tale type of film. And then as soon as you get to the 60s, it's like things are brighter, they're more optimistic, they're more lighthearted, they're more fun and entertaining and campy, and it's just a total evolution of style within one franchise. And you see it as soon as you hit the 60s with Mothra in 61, and then even further really done and really sort of solidified with King Kong versus Godzilla, and that just sort of carries us through the decade.
Yeah, and we're for anybody who hasn't seen these and is watching along with us through the weeks, we're only going to get cheesier here in a couple movies, so prepare yourself.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can't be a Godzilla fan and be like, yeah, I'm a Godzilla fan, but like all those cheesy ones can just, you know, go pound sand. It's like, what, half the franchise, you know, maybe more, you know? It's like, what are you talking about? You only like the super duper serious Godzilla movie, so that's about 4 of them, maybe, you know? Like, what are you a fan of again? You're a fan of Godzilla, right? Like, it all kind of comes with the territory.
Yeah, from King Kong versus Godzilla till probably Godzilla versus Megalon, you know, there's those in between there are definitely more for entertainment value. And we kind of get a little more serious in versus Mechagodzilla, but still more towards the entertainment to, you know, for the kids to bring in the money and just keep this franchise going.
Indeed, it goes much more from disaster movie to sort of adventure movie. And every viewer and every fan's going to kind of have their line where, you know, where is a bridge too far? Like you ask audience to buy in on giant monsters. Okay. You ask them to buy in on giant monsters that are a little sort of personified and humanized. Okay. You ask them to buy in on these magical little fairies that can talk to the monsters. You ask them to buy in on a monster that's an alien and monsters that are talking to each other and getting their dialogue translated. You ask them to buy in on alien invasions, and then, you know, and monsters, you know, jumping around and dancing. You know, it's like each movie's kind of going further down into the tone and style, and each movie sort of adding more on top. And it's hard to pinpoint of like, well, all of these movies were serious and all of these movies were totally bonkers. It's like, well, it's all about where you draw the line. You know, some people, as soon as you start introducing magic fairies, you're in La La Land. And for other people, it's like, well, I can handle the aliens how they're done in this movie, but the aliens how they're done in this movie is just stupid. You know, it's like, okay, so monsters can talk, but you know, you draw the line at flying, but, you know, we can do, you know, jumping high and getting carried and launched at each other. You know, it's all kind of it's all shades of gray. You know, it's not black and white, but it is interesting how it just kind of goes further, and each movie kind of does a little bit more and gets a little more wild.
Yeah, this Showa era is, I mean, I think that's why it's considered a lot of people's favorite, is there's so many different films and they're different sets, and this film goes one way and then the very next film goes a completely different route. And I think that's, like I said, why a lot of people's favorite era is this Showa era. I don't know if it's mine personally. I guess we'll figure out down the road once we keep watching these films. But I would say that a lot or most of the Godzilla fans pick these first 15 films to be their favorite era.
Yep, and the one thing that the baffling thing for me is that the quickest people to pick the Showa era as their favorite will also be the quickest to say, like, oh, these modern American movies are too silly and they're getting too goofy and they're ruining it. Like it's like, okay, so it's one rule that I've kind of almost learned with a lot of Godzilla fans. It's like, no matter what Japan does with Godzilla, that is a cool and unique and interesting thing. And the minute that Americans try to do the same thing with Godzilla, you're destroying the character and tarnishing the legacy. So it's like, you know, Godzilla fans get very, very, very sort of entrenched in their specific views of the character and what qualifies as good and bad. But you know, I find it hard that people are like, oh, this MonsterVerse stuff is bogus, I'm going to go back to my 70s Godzilla movies. It's like, okay, that's fine, you know, like I find something to appreciate about all of it, because, you know, we're not getting any more sliding drop kicks, you know, we're not getting any more monster conversations being translated by little fairies. We're getting more Godzilla movies, but these kind of Godzilla movies, we have what we have, and we're probably never going back to that style again. So we should probably appreciate the ones that we got, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's, if having a heave and going to Middle Earth is unrealistic to you, well, I guess go back to the Showa era and go to Planet X, where we have Martians and Exilians and all that.
Yeah. There'll be riots if Godzilla does the jumping celebration dance in the Hollow Earth in the next Godzilla and Kong movie.
I would stand up in the theater cheering. I might be the only one, but I would be the one. All right, we'll go on to monster design, and since she or he, depending on, you know, how you want to look at it, which one you watched, will be the simplest conversation. We'll talk about the Mothra larvae design, the caterpillar, if you will.
Yeah, still looking very much like a caterpillar. I'm not trying to be too sarcastic here, but I literally do think it's the same exact one that we saw in Mothra vs. Godzilla in terms of design. There's differences. I'm not really picking up on them. It's still a solid design, still kind of looks like beads or, you know, turd or whatever derogatory thing you want to say. But I mean, it's iconic in its own way, and I dig it.
Yeah, for sure. For this film, the Godzilla suit and Mothra prop were both recycled from the previous film. They did do a couple modifications to each one, I found, just to kind of update them, make sure they looked new for the film. But yeah, I mean, it's the same Mothra from the last film, so everything that could have been said, you said. It looks like a caterpillar. I always think that it just looks like it's rolling down a track, like there's a track in the ground and it's kind of pulling it along with it. But I mean, what can you really do with a caterpillar that can't do anything but crawl or across the ground?
Indeed.
The Rodan suit, they did make a new suit for Rodan and Ghidorah for this film, which caused difficulties on set due to all the wires that were attached to the suits to try to help them fly. But what did you think about the Rodan suit in this one?
I think it's a good look. Funny, I'm going to say I think it's a good look. Here's all the things that are awful about it. No, it's the design overall is good. Doesn't fare so well in the close-ups. Like especially there's an early close-up where he's just emerging from the rocks and he squawks or screams or roars, and it just has a very this is kind of a rinky-dinky puppet head kind of a look to it, with the way the mouth just kind of flaps open, and you sort of see, you know, the trick with monsters and suits that have mouths is like you don't want to see like where the back end of the mouth ends, you know. In real life, it would be a hole that goes down into the throat of the creature. So when Rodan squawks and the mouth opens and you just see, you know, the end of the puppet there, the sort of it kind of destroys that illusion of believing that it's a real creature with a mouth and a throat, you know. So it's not the greatest close-ups, but overall, like I like this sort of this bronze kind of look that Rodan has. I think in flight it's got a good silhouette, you know. I'm overall a fan of it, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I like Rodan. This was the first movie I seen him in since I had never seen the original Rodan. And from a distance, he looks good. Like you said, on the close-ups, they could have done better. But I mean, for 60 years ago, the props look good. The suits. I mean, I wouldn't be able to design that suit today to look any better than it did 60 years ago. So, you know, props to them. Give them a slow clap.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and the thing is that, you know, we've talked about this before. It's like our generation kind of went through the phase where if something wasn't done with a computer effect, it kind of wasn't cool. Like all of the cool, new, awesome stuff was being done with computers. But now it's almost, now that everything is done with a computer, it's almost just as impressive and magical to go back and see, like, yeah, someone was making this thing. Someone physically painted it, sculpted it, designed it, put it on wires, photographed it. Like, it was all physically there in camera. There was no digital trickery. It's like, would you know the first thing about casting a mold of a monster head or stringing it up from wires and filming it in a way that's lit against a backdrop that kind of looks like a sky? You know, it's like there's such a handcrafted, you know, artisanship to some of this that it's like, yeah, nowadays it's all just in a computer, but no one would know the first thing about trying to do this without a computer these days. And so to go back to these 60s movies and just see like real creatures, real monster effects, there's a magic to that now.
Yeah, and that's one thing I like about some films and not so much about others is they actually have the wings flapping. Because in other films down the road, you know, it's like Ghidorah is kind of just soaring. He's not flapping his wings. It's almost like he's just floating there.
Yeah, sort of in a perpetual glide. Yeah.
Yeah, and in this one, you know, you can see Rodan's wings flapping, trying to continue flying. Same with Ghidorah. And I actually like that they tried to make it look realistic to that point.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, there's that kind of suspension of disbelief where it's like, okay, it's like you know, what's a joke that I think in Star Wars Episode 1, there's Watto who works in the shop on Tatooine, and he's kind of has this bloated belly and these tiny wings, and the animators were talking about, you know, it doesn't really look like his wings that he's flapping would really be able to sustain his own flight, and George Lucas was like, well, just, you know, think that he's got like some helium in his belly or something that kind of helps him float and things like that, you know, just coming up with your own sort of weird sciencey reasons to kind of let this otherworldly visual kind of occur. But, you know, we know that it's the technical limitations, but it kind of is like when you think of these flying classic monsters like Rodan and Mothra, they have this sort of slow flap glide that they have that is sort of, it doesn't make physical sense and scientific sense, but it kind of makes kind of visual artistic sense, and it's like an iconic part of the character.
Yeah, for sure. I can't disagree with you, but once we get down the road, they lose me when wings aren't flapping or stuff like that. It bugs me. Granted, I still watch the films.
Oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with being pulled out of it. You know, you have to kind of, you know, you can come up with all the justifications you want for yourself and just enjoy it. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with being critical of it.
All right, so in his first appearance on film, King Ghidorah was designed by Akira Watanabe, and the wings, he's gold, technically, but his wings were originally intended to bear a rainbow-like hue or design. What did you think of Ghidorah in this film?
I think it's a cool look. I'm sure the initial design may have been a bit more ambitious and regal, and that it was, you know, a little compromised when the reality of it is that each head is on a marionette kind of string, and maybe it appears a little stiff and bulky for the for the liking of the designers, but it's iconic in its own way. It's interesting because there are some posters and like promotional images that show the wings being kind of rainbow colored, and that always threw me off in the early days of the internet. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, was I not paying that much attention in the original movie? Are they actually rainbow in the movie? And I just had like a bad VHS, like it always threw me off. But that's an interesting thing. I'm glad that that Ghidorah is sort of officially fully golden. I think that's a better look. It's a cool monster design because it's so not human. No arms, 3 heads. These it's just it does feel alien and unique. Shooting lightning, aka gravity beams, out of the mouths. It's just it's a unique look. When he bursts out of the meteorite, sort of engulfed in flames, it's just a cool visual. It's a unique monster compared to the kind of monsters we've had before.
Yeah, don't forget the 2 tails.
Yeah, yes, the splitting forked tail. Yeah, the underrated element of the design.
Yeah, and then it's on each head. It's got like little horns. It's got a little bit of hair, or I don't know what technically you want to call that on there, but got some little hairs on there. I would have loved to actually seen what the original design could have looked like, because would it have been like? Go ahead.
I don't know here. I don't know if like Google yields anything. I just remember hearing somewhere that like I don't know if it was Subaraya or whoever designed it, that they were kind of like not very happy with the practical execution of how you bring something like that to life. You say 3-headed dragon and it sounds kind of like crazy and ambitious, and like you see it and it's like this big thing and the wings are kind of stiff and the heads are all on strings and bobbing around. And so maybe they're just their vision of what it could have or should have been just sort of had to be compromised a little bit. I don't know, but I remember hearing that like they didn't love the way that it had to be to get it on screen.
Yeah, and it might they were going for something dark and like a villain type. Maybe they thought, why would we want something bright and colorful, almost like a Mothra who kids are going to root for? No, we want them rooting for Godzilla and Rodan.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything really, like I'm trying to do a Google search to see if there's any sort of like original concept art or design to kind of give a sense of maybe something more of what they were going for. But I'm not really. I think maybe it was just a matter of they wanted it to be a bit more fluidy, a little bit more, maybe a bit more regal, a bit more mobile instead of kind of stationary like it has to be. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll probably never know why they chose to just go full gold instead of actual, giving him some rainbow coloration. But anyway, so on to the Big G himself. They did use the same suit in this one as they did in the previous film. And anyone who's listening knows that this is one of my favorite suits. I love the look. I love the mean looking eyebrows. I love almost like the death stare that he gave Mothra's egg in the last film. You can tell it's a little more beat up in this one. That it'd been sitting around for a couple months until this film was released. But I like this design. This is one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's fun to kind of see, to kind of get films that were, you get suit consistency by nature of the movies being produced so closely together, more so than anything else, there just wasn't enough time to go by to force them to make a new suit. So they sort of reuse and patch up the suit that they had. And I think it's cool. Like there's something kind of endearing to me when like the suits kind of have like a little bit of a beat up look, a little bit of a wear and tear on them, because it feels like that's happening to the character. And it feels a little bit like Godzilla hasn't had the time, if he's always sort of evolving and always sort of regenerating, like he's a little bit, he's like in between cycles here, and he hasn't really kind of like fully recuperated and fully regenerated from some of the beatings he's been taking.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we get some consistency throughout the films with the suits, more often than we don't, which is nice. But as we said, in later on films down the road, you can tell that the suits have taken a beating and some of the budgets are getting cut, and it was time for a new suit, and clearly the budget wouldn't allow for that. But I do have, I said most of my fun facts for you already. I only had a couple, which one of them was the Ghidorah's wings bearing the rainbow design, and then a couple other ones. But I did find the set for the base of Mount Fuji was built at a 1/25th scale, and it took 12,000 hours to build.
Whew.
So that was my big fun fact for this film.
Wow.
Yeah, you figure 12,000 man hours, that's... I mean, if you got 20 guys working on it...
Yeah, like we're talking about, it just really throws into perspective the amount of sort of the physical production aspect of these movies that just gets so overlooked. And, hand in hand, you talk about how all of the creatures with the wires and stuff, like, could you imagine if they had a flying adult Mothra in this movie as well? It's like how much more chaotic it would have been to maintain all of the wires and strings and puppetry of everything. It's a testament to how much hard work they were doing to pull off some of the shots and scenes that they got.
Yeah, and it's lucky that they can recycle some of the suits, that they don't completely get torn apart in films, or the missiles actually tear them up, because that's another how many hundreds of hours that you have to make a new suit. So recycling the suits, down the road, it looks cheap, but it saves them so much time and money, and they can get the movie out faster to continue making more money for the franchise.
Exactly. Yep.
But that's all I have for Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. I don't know if you have anything for me or the listeners.
No. I mean, this is that movie where if Godzilla officially sort of takes that first turn from villain to hero, and so it's a huge moment in the history of the franchise, and that's a heck of a legacy to have for a film.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, to end on the fight that it does, it's a good way to end this film and show that Godzilla is our savior. He needed help, but he was our savior.
Yep, and he's got his Joker, if you will, in the form of King Ghidorah. His sort of ultimate nemesis in a lot of ways.
Yep, his Green Goblin to his Spider-Man.
Exactly. That's the better comparison.
Yeah, I had that one in the chamber for you. As soon as you said Joker, I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to one-up him."
Now, that's the one. That is the more apt description. He is the Green Goblin to Godzilla's Spider-Man, 100%.
I love it. But if you have nothing else, I have nothing else on this one. That's all.
Yeah. I'm all. Yeah.
You're out. That's it. That's all we got. No.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
End. Done. Final.
Yeah. This film was followed up by Invasion of Astro Monster, or in America's title, it was Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, which was released on December 19th, 1965, and we will be looking at that next week. So until next time, thanks, Chris, for joining me. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And again, Godzilla vs. Monster Zero or Invasion of Astro Monster next week. And until next time.